end of January '99, I broke my right ankle in a horse accident, and I was 6.5 months with the external fixator holding those 7 pieces back into the 2 pieces that they'd ought to be, and kind of changed the way I looked at life, I guess. They said, you're going to have to get a desk job, you won't be able to walk around, blah, blah, blah. And who in here remembers, we're going to age you, where you were when Kennedy was shot? I was on the playground in the 4th grade at Taft School in Boise, Idaho. You know, where were you when the first space shuttle blew up? I was on Derry MacArthur, Boise Kenworth trucks. Where were you on 9/11? I'm sitting on Finney and at Tana Kirby's helping Uncle Darrell ship cattle. Anybody in the room remember where you were at 10:30 in the morning on December 12th, 2002? No. But for me, it was a big day because I went in to see a different kind of a doctor. He was a chiropractor, a certified applied kinesiologist, and an expert in nutrition. And he said, stop eating this inflammatory food and start eating non-inflammatory food. My first introduction to Weston A. Price. And within 10 days, the pain in my right ankle started going away because of what I ate. Well, that was kind of the reason that I now give this talk. Before I had done that, I wasn't thinking about how we nourish the soil and the kind of plants that would provide and what that would do for our cattle. So if you don't have Gabe Brown type soil or are 10 years into a winter grazing program like Cooper is into, where things are getting better on your place, if we don't have those things in place, we're going to still have that pain I had in my ankle in our animals. Animals that are alkaline tend to resist disease, internal, external parasites, better than animals that are acid. They tend to attract those things. My contention is we have way too many of the neighbors' toxins blowing in. Who in here lives where the wind does not blow? Okay. And we don't have enough minerals in the forage that we're giving them. If we're not there, how do we clean them up and get the minerals in without breaking the bank? That's kind of the main thrust of what I want to talk about this morning. I like questions. I'll just start going on, I guess. Strengthen the host. If we can get our animals alkaline. I'll go through these more a little later, but sodium bicarbonate, it's a very alkaline for the body. We can get them alkaline right away. The Redmond conditioner, it raises pH just like the bicarb. The bicarb is just a band-aid. Today, tomorrow, the next day. We didn't fix anything when we're doing bicarb. If we're feeding conditioner, we raise pH, but we bound a lot of the neighbor's toxins. Takes 500 straws to break the camel's back. This is going to get rid of the first 4 or 450 straws by detoxing them out of the body. It has a bunch of minerals that aren't watered down with sodium chloride, so they're more concentrated, and then it promotes the growth of the biology in the gut. So we got them alkaline, and we started fixing the problem. The sea salts, I've got a bag of Redmond or C90 or the stuff out of Kansas here. There are various sea salts. The Kansas and the Redmond were deposited a long time ago. The Vikings throwing their trash overboard never got into those sea salts. The C90 is the one that Maynard Murray used, which I'll talk about him in a little bit, but he discovered that deposit. Apple cider vinegar, even though it is acid, it's alkaline forming in the body. Anybody in here drink bright vinegar? Okay, so Roger Fairchild and Patricia Bragg found each other about 22 years ago. In the first year, Roger sold brag, 50,000 gallons of vinegar. And the demand for brag vinegar took off. 16 years later, the last full year that Roger sold Patricia Bragg vinegar, he sold her 4.5 million gallons of vinegar. The old gray mare is no longer in the Bragg bottle because Bragg sold and they went with somebody else. That old gray mare is now in the Fairchild bottle. Sorry, that was not a paid advertisement, but I wanted people to know things changed. Yeah, so the main ways to raise pH. Salt is much slower in raising pH. And then the current environment, we can't do that. Various issues you could add to the list. I don't like reading my own slides, but I'll just leave it there for a second. I want you to start thinking for yourself. Getting a clean, mineral-rich, internutrient environment is a pretty big thing, not only for disease this year, but for expressing the genetics that you already own better. Getting that clean, mineral-rich, and get it out. Pottinger's cats. Anybody in here read Pottinger's cats? There was a researcher in, I think it was the San Francisco area, it might have been LA, 100 years ago, maybe a little less. Anyway, they had cats they were doing adrenalectomies on, and then they would supplement adrenal gland out of livestock, and they needed to get the pill to be the same amount, and so they were using these cats to prove that. Well, he had cats in two different areas. One was a raw meat and raw milk diet, and one was a cooked meat and cooked milk diet. These cats couldn't reproduce after 4 generations. Same meat and same milk, all they did was cooked it. They denatured it, if you will, and these couldn't reproduce in 4 generations. Each generation of cooked diet took 3 generations of raw diet to get the health back. Do I need to raise this up a little bit?
That might help. They don't catch it very well.
Is that better? Any better? No, not really. Maybe the other side.
It's been happening to everybody in every room.
Well, let's see. Uh-oh. Is that any better? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. And so I kind of want to talk about that. There's not only can you avoid the disease this year, but that phenotypic expression of the genetics that you already own. I have a story about a fellow in South Dakota about that. So Simon Sinek wrote a book, Start With Why. I don't know if any of you have read that. A number of different stories. This top one here, the pink eye in Ohio. Gerald Fry and I did a school in Fort Wayne, Indiana, basically 7.5 years ago. It was at the end of July, and there was a fellow that had come from southeast Ohio. He had about 300 cows, and he already had 30 active cases of pink eye at the end of July in his cows. I mean, he could see it was just going to be a really bad pink eye year. You have to sit up front now. You're just late to the game. Anyway, and so he heard the talk, but he didn't have everything. But he had the stuff to make the mineral water, and I'll go through taking a feed sack and doing that. So he went home, and in a second stock tank, he made this mineral water. And he emailed me 2 weeks later, and he said, other than one of the blind ones, 5 were blind, 25 had pink eye. Other than one of the blind ones, the rest of them totally resolved on their own. I didn't doctor them, and I didn't get any more cases of pink eye. And all he did was put sea salt in a bag and put it in a second stock tank and let them decide they wanted to drink ocean water. Our blood and seawater are the same 92 minerals in the same balance, except I believe it's iron and magnesium are reversed. Maynard Murray, knowing that, they took a dog, took 90% of the blood out and replaced it with seawater, and the dog lived. So the closest thing to our blood is ocean water. You can make this yourself. It takes 120 days to change out all the red blood cells in our blood or in your livestock's blood. So that's 120 days to the first rung up the ladder of better health, and then another 120 days. But it's 120 days down as well. So some people are getting pink eye at the beginning of the heat pink eye season. Their cows were kind of on thin ice as far as mineralization was concerned, and all you had to do was add another straw or two, heat, flies, and we've got pink eye, where some people, it might have been at the end of August, they finally got a case or two of pink eye. Well, they had their cattle pretty well mineralized, and then over time they got low enough that they were susceptible to disease. Questions? Going too fast? You guys are too easy on me.
I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so when you were talking about changing the pH, you're talking about changing the pH of the rumen or the...
Well, for human beings, Kerry Ring's biological theory of ionization. You want to dig into it. But saliva or urine is what you're changing. And so if you had the animals in a squeeze chute, you could just take the pH paper from Walgreens. This is not an advertisement for Walgreens. If you've got a local pharmacy, go there. But anyway, you could just rub that in their mouth, the saliva. You could tell a lot of people are trying to get urine. Well, it's how long are we going to wait? So, but if you had them in a chute, you could do that. You've got 100 cows, and 10 of them have a lot of flies, and the other 90 don't. Well, do we want to spend a lot of money on the 90 that don't, or do we want to just get rid of the 10 that are not adapted to your environment? If 90% of them have flies, maybe we want to try to do some of this stuff and then work our way into better adapted genetics for our zip code. Did I get there? I'm really bad. People ask a question, and it's like, well, my mind kicks in, here's some information they don't know. If they knew this, they wouldn't have asked that question. So I don't say yes or blue or 37. I just start in on all this information they didn't have. And so I don't mean to be that way, it's just the way my mind works. There was a 3,000 head dairy in Canada called Steve Swerzik's brother Tom to go up and do some work. Excuse me. Did you want me to put that on? We're good? Okay. Their complaint was 35% first service AI. So they tested a bunch of stuff, water, everything, and they said, well, these 3 things you shouldn't be feeding, and you need to feed 10 or 12 ounces of conditioner a day and 10 or 12 ounces of sea salt a day. So they divided that into 2 1,500 head groups. So we've got 1,500, they left the same way, they got 1,500 that they changed. Excuse me, 60 days later, the ones that they were getting all the detox from the clay and the minerals were at 70% first service AI. And 2 more liters of milk per dairy cow per day. So 3,000 more liters of milk on that 1,500. Well, they quit the experiment and everybody went on that. Similar situation, this Steve Swerzik in Nebraska, he will find bulls that are kind of all that, but they won't pass the semen test. Somebody hasn't done a good job of nourishing them. If he finds 5 of those and takes them home and feeds them 10, 12 ounces of sea salt a day, 4 out of 5 will pass the semen test in 45 days with flying colors. You know, our biggest problem, I don't want to do it. too much big of a story. One of the most dramatic deals. Who asked the question about getting them alkaline? Back here? Okay. So, a friend of mine, there's a lot of good and bad stories about this fellow. He's in the northwest corner of South Dakota. And I got there about the 1st of August of 22. And I got there late in the afternoon. Well, Rock always goes out and checks his cows in the morning before he does anything else. There are seats up front. You don't have to stand. His wife went down to Belfouche to do some shopping and stuff. And when I got there about 30 minutes before he did, we were talking and I see him looking over my shoulder and I go, well, Rock, what's going on? He goes, I think those cows are in the wrong pasture. They're a half or 3/4 of a mile away. Well, we got out there and sure enough, there were about 275 cows and calves, and they were making more noise than if we had just weaned 500 calves yesterday, and the cows are on that side and the calves are here, and we're trying to have this conversation. Nobody would be hearing me. They were making that much noise or more. I've never seen a group of cattle in such distress in my life. Well, what had happened is the flies have hit. They were fine in the morning. There really weren't that many flies, but the flies had hit so hard. And so we went back and we got 4 feeders that were about 10 feet long and, maybe 18, 20 inches wide, and set them kind of the 4 corners of the room. And each one of those, we put a bag of the conditioner. We put a bag of the baking soda out of Rifle, Colorado, and then we put a 50-pound bag of dry molasses that he had, and we mixed it up. So 150 pounds of stuff there and there and there and there. And over the course of the next 48 hours, those pairs consumed 7 ounces of bicarb per head per day, or not quite a pound over the course of 2 days, and 7 ounces of conditioner. But 36 hours after we put this mix out there, they must have gotten alkaline, because the flies left his herd, went over the fence to the neighbor's yearlings who are now running with their tails in the air. But they were no longer on his cows because his cows weren't a good house for bugs. They were alkaline. Flies didn't want anything to do with them. That's kind of powerful to me. I don't know if anybody else thinks that that's what. Yes.
Did you have any stories from this last year in the stable flies? A lot of guys.
Nothing quite this dramatic. People don't believe you that this works. There's no university research that's going to back up what I'm telling you. It's just happy ranchers out there. Okay, wait a minute. I do. That same guy this summer, for the first time in probably 5 or 6 years, he started on all this 7.5 years ago. For the first time in 5 or 6 years, he started getting some foot rot in his cows and in his calves. And he hadn't put a needle in an animal in 6 years for sickness until this last year. Well, his normal enticers, which I'll get into, weren't working. But there's a product made, a couple places now. It's called Lasahol, and it's a fermented molasses with 8% alcohol in it. It takes 1 ounce per cow per day. You don't want to feed it year-round. You would feed it in the summer when there's that stress, or in the winter when there's the other stress. It's a ton of energy, and there's a slide coming up about energy and getting cows pregnant towards the end. But we went out there, and 75% of the cattle were downwind of us. There were a few upwind. Most of them were laying down, I think. And so we went out and we spread out 50 pounds of sea salt in one of these 10-foot long trays, and I think in that pasture there were 160 cows. So he put 160 ounces of this Lasahol in with this salt. He hadn't been able to get them to consume salt, and that's why he was in this mess, in my opinion. Anyway, just as soon as we opened the jugs with this Lasahol, the first cow, her head came up. It's like, what is this smell? And then 3, and then 5, and some start standing up, and we got it all mixed together, and we backed off. And in 10 minutes, they're butting each other out of the way to get to this mix of sea salt minerals and Lasahol, the enticer. And we went back 3 hours later, 40 pounds of that salt was gone. The cows had all moved off and were grazing, and the only thing left around there other than 2 or 3 cows was a bunch of calves that hadn't been able to get there on the front end. It was the best enticer he'd ever found, and within 2 days he stopped doctoring animals because he started getting the minerals back in there. I don't know if that answered your question, but same guy, different year. He finally started to have a problem because he couldn't entice enough minerals. He couldn't get enough prevention in there. I'll be right there. Prevention. I like prevention. I don't like reacting to problems. I want to prevent them from happening. So it looks like I'm spending more money than I need to, but if they're sick, they're not gaining. If they're sick, the one in utero is not developing correctly. All right? Yes, ma'am.
So the Lasahol is just an enticer, it doesn't have its own medicinal properties or?
No, it does. The Lasahol is just an enticer. It doesn't have its own properties. It's a lot of energy. It's 8% alcohol, and it's fermented molasses, Weston Price. I don't know, anybody in here know of Weston A. Price? Okay, so those 14 groups of people, nothing water and Western processed in their diet. It was how they grew and prepared their food, and a lot of that preparation was fermentation, which, like soaking nuts, which isn't necessarily, sorry, I'm getting off into a totally different talk here, isn't fermentation, but you get rid of the phytic acid and the enzyme inhibitors, and so you get more of what's in there out of there. Back to Steve Schwarzig, I called him in January one year and just, well, Steve, what's up? You know, we kind of do that every once in a while. And he said, there are seats up front here if you want to sit. You don't have to stand. Anyway, and he said, well, I weaned 750 calves on the 17th of January, December. And on Christmas morning, 8 days later, we had a 2-inch freezing rain. And here I am at the 17th of January, and I've still not had one sick calf. How often does this happen? You made it through the sweat with a 2-inch freezing rain in the middle of it. You didn't lose any, none got sick. Well, he was force feeding 10 ounces of sea salt per calf per day, 575 pound average, for that whole month. They were getting 6 or 7 times what they would normally ingest. Weston Price, those groups of people that didn't have any cavities, they were getting 5 to 10 times the vitamins and minerals the average American was getting in the 30s, and we don't get half of that today. Anyway, here he did the same thing for these calves, and a 2-inch freezing rain couldn't make them sick. Okay, he was mixing it into the feed.
So to get them to eat 10 ounces a day, so a lot of times enhancer in there to get that much salt through them then? I mean,
Bingo. The question, the comment was this 10 ounces, they're not going to eat that much, you're going to need enticer. Yes. In this case, he was mixing it into the feed because he had put them in his little feedlots. Okay, and there needs to be a little moisture to make it stick to the feed. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a level of intake at which GI distress occurs?
A level of intake at which GI distress occurs. In Canada, they found that feeding 20 ounces of sea salt, 1.25 pounds a day, cattle would back off the feed. So I've had people get on this, they're weaning calves, they've got some yearlings they're feeding, and you know, I try not to start too high on this suggestion, but I say, well, start at 5 ounces and then go, 6, 7, 8, and they go, well, when I got up to 8 ounces, the cattle backed off of feed, so I backed off of the salt. And I'm like, so were the cattle wringing their tails and they weren't full? What was their behavior? Oh no, they were laying down, chewing their cud, they're happy, licking themselves. And I go, you got exactly what you wanted. They were getting enough minerals that they didn't require to eat as much feed. The minerals cost way less in the sea salt form than the feed cost. And he's like, oh my gosh, okay, we're gonna go back there. Okay, that's enough of that. So my favorite book on epigenetics is Pottinger's Prophecy. However, Epigenetic Revolution is a tough read, but I found this Waddington's Epigenetic Landscape. How many were in here yesterday? If you were all in here, I won't go through. Okay, not enough. So we put our animals inside of a fence, and unless we get them what they need, that ball is going to roll down the left side of this landscape. The earlier in life we get a clean, mineral-rich interuterine environment, before the cow and the bull get together, it takes 120 days to change out all the red blood cells. The earlier we get them cleaned up, the more we can get this sort of a expression when the calf is born. And well, I'm on a Lake Erie. I was about 15 miles off the east end of Lake Erie. This fellow had 45 purebred cows, so he'd had 20 to 25 heifer calves a year. I was there in March, early April. They were still eating around a round bale feeder. And, excuse me. We were measuring all these animals, and his 11-month-old heifers, there were one or two that I thought phenotypically were good enough to make a replacement. Of his 23-month-old heifers, there were 3 or 4, but of his 35-month-old heifers that were just getting ready to have their first calf, there was no way he could get them developed to calve at 2. Just nothing was happening right in his environment. There were 13 or 14. I'm like, well, did you change your mineral program, use different bulls, you know, asking questions? And you think about winter, lake effect snow. It rains there in the fall, and now we've got mud, and then it snows and melts, and they've got mud, and they've got mud, and they've got mud all winter long. So I said, did you either have a really dry winter or a really cold winter here in the past? Ma'am, there are chairs up front here if you want, or maybe one right there. Anyway, and he goes, oh yeah, we had a bad winter here a few years ago. I go, well, when was it? So he gets his phone out, and the winter that those 35-month-old heifers, just getting ready to have the first calf, the winter they were in utero, it had gotten 12 or 15 degrees colder in the fall and the ground froze. They were either on frozen ground or snow all winter. Mother Nature eliminated that stress, and he started expressing the genetics that he already owned. So I said, you're either going to have to move, that wasn't going to happen, or somehow recreate this lack of mud situation for the winter months so that you can express and then sell phenotypically the genetics that you already own, which would, that kind of was mush. He was getting a better phenotypic expression when that stress from the mud had been eliminated from his situation. And then down on the Arizona Strip, there's a fellow, he runs 1,000 cows on 250,000 acres. So it takes 250 acres for a cow to make a living, 4 inches of rain, average. Anyway, he called me one August and he said, normally I have to wean the calves off of these first calf heifers at 3 months of age to get them to breed back, but they're not losing body condition this year like they normally do. Well, Kelly, did you get more than your normal 4 inches of rain? Do you actually have grass this year? No, different mineral, different bull, you know, thinking finally, I said, well, Kelly, how old were those heifers when you weaned them? And he thought for a little bit and he goes, you know, that was the first year I tried that 10-month weaning. He weaned the calves, sent everything he didn't want to town, and he put those heifers back on their mom and waited to 10 months before he pulled them off. Anyway, I said, well, that was kind of a leap of faith. He said, yes. About 2.5 years later, which we talked in between, but just out of the blue, he says, you know, of all of the things I've tried out here on the Arizona Strip, this is the most profitable thing I've ever done. Those heifers just turn into cows right away if I leave them on and fully develop the villi and the rumen. And he said, you couldn't pay me $100 a replacement heifer to wean her before 10 months of age. So we've got to shut off the garden hose of dirty minerals. We got water. Yes, sir. Right there.
So you can get the expression you want in several ways. Change the alkalinity of the internal environment, or